friends, thank you for joining us for another episode of Uncommon Voices, Uncommon Visions. I'm your host, Dr. Valerie Nyberg, and I'm super excited to have with me Dr. Jared Smith. Dr. Smith was the middle and high school associate principal and principal for 10 years in the Muscatine School District. He's been serving as the South Tama Superintendent for the last 4 years and is going to be transitioning into his new role as the Waterloo Superintendent this summer. And as if that wasn't enough, he is the host of the Group Project podcast, author of Learning Curve, Lessons Learned on Leadership, Education, and Personal Growth, and has an upcoming book called Turning Points, More Lessons Learned on Leadership, Education, and Personal Growth. So thank you, Dr. Smith, for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing really good. Thank you for that kind introduction. And thanks, I had you on my show a little while, it was a while ago, but man, it's fun to have these conversations, and I'm glad I can return the favor here. This is great.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. So let's just dig in. What attracted you to the Waterloo Superintendency?
Oh gosh. First and foremost, I grew up in Waterloo. And so some people know this story and some people don't, but I spent almost all of my childhood in Waterloo. So I attended, from grade school through high school, the Waterloo Community School District. So anytime you grow up in a school district, you've got that intrinsic motivation to want to give back and to want to, you were a student there. So you want to do what's best for the students who are after you. And then even beyond that, I was an assistant principal at Waterloo East High School for 4 years as well. So I was a student there. I did my student teaching there. I was an assistant principal there. It's just there's so much ingrained intrinsic motivation to want to lead that district that was really, if you were to say, what's the main reason why you applied for that position, that would be it.
And it's also a coming home of sorts. So it's like a full circle moment too.
Yeah. I still have family up there. My mom and dad they're separated. They're, got their own separate lives, but they're both in the area. So I'm excited for that, but I think they're even more excited because they get to have me around. You know how it goes. My parents are excited for me to be around them some more.
Awesome. So looking at your Waterloo entry plan, which thank you very much for sharing that on Twitter. It's really interesting to see people share that kind of behind the scenes work in such a public way. But looking at that, it looks like you've used some key principles to shape and guide each phase of your entry plan. Why those principles?
Oh gosh, and I pulled up my entry plan here as well, so I could take a look at it. I think in education, we always at least I'm sure you do the same thing. You okay, who's done this before me that can kind of give me a little bit of guidance?
Yep.
And so when I started applying for superintendent jobs 5 or 6 years ago, there was a guy by the name of Jason Glass. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know that name. He used to be the Iowa Department of Ed, the director for the Iowa Department of Ed. Yep. And he shared his entry plan when he went to Colorado on social media. And I got my hands on that and I was like, whoa, this is awesome. So I kind of took what he had and I tweaked it to fit my own style. And so what you see there is something that's been tweaked 5 or 6 times. And it's finally gotten to this point where it's a 2-pager. But you asked about the principles, and, I kind of took some of Jason's original ideas, but really kind of, like I said, made it my own. So I'm looking at it right now, I'm currently right now in the pre-entry point. I'm still haven't started there yet. I won't start till July. So I'm in the connections and logistics point. And, it's really just connections is that very first word. I keep track of all the meetings I've had, the one-to-one meetings where I'm just kind of getting to know. You even
posted that on Instagram too, or Twitter too.
Yeah. And so far I'm up to 40 that I specific one-on-one meetings prior to starting. And each of those is 30 minutes to an hour. So you start adding those up. That's a lot. So,
That's
I mean, the common theme across all of the principles is like building connections,
right.
building relationships, listening, understanding what is current, honoring what's currently going on, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think I've ever used that term before. I'm going to use it now. And then again, phase 2 is that relationship building, and I'm continuing to build relationships. And the thing that Jason used in his plan was this idea about consistently asking 3 questions.
Mm-hmm.
What should the school district keep doing? What should the school district stop doing? What should the school district start doing? Those 3 questions consistently. I use that as a model here at my current position,
Mm-hmm.
and it worked really well. I got great feedback. It's really meant to be not pointing fingers at previous administration. It's just like, what do we want to keep doing? What's not working? Let's be honest. So that's like that's my plan for July and August. And even really, I'm kind of even further out on that, but asking those questions of all kinds of stakeholders and all kinds of situations.
Uh-huh.
And then looking for the common themes that come across those conversations and using those common themes as a rationale for doing the things we do, or continuing or stopping. The biggest mistake, and I'll pause here in a second to see if you want to, the biggest mistake I see leaders do is they'll come in with their own ideas without asking for any feedback, and they'll implement those ideas. And while they might seem like they make sense, if you haven't got buy-in and you haven't it doesn't feel like it's their plan, the staff's plan or the community's plan, you're going to run into issues. And so that's one of my biggest thing. And I haven't even got to the further steps, but we can pause. But those are that's really, when you look at my plan, building connections, building relationships, asking questions, and then searching for feedback that you can use later on in my first year 2, whatever it might be.
Right. And I completely agree. But I also know that in places like Waterloo, and I think right now in education, everyone has this feeling of the sky is falling.
Yes.
And oh, we have to immediately do X, Y, and Z. So how do you take that balanced approach of building those relationships, making those connections, learning what is working and how to position yourself with the immediacy that things have to change because it's not doing what it should be doing?
Yeah, good question. We've actually been going through a lot of these some similar conversations with Waterloo. Do we make this change right away, or do we wait a while? And as eager as I am to want, the sky is falling. You said it. People want, we want to do something different.
Right.
I've just learned that sometimes if you're not strategic with how you go about making change, as good as the idea might sound, you're going to run into issues. And here's an example I'm going to give you. I'm going to back up about 4 or 5 months ago. We, as a school district, we're going to give our teachers all $1,000 retention bonus. Right. Who wouldn't want 1,000? I mean, it's just part of us, and our leadership team is like, let's just do it without asking questions. Let's just give them all $1,000. But there's some things we didn't anticipate about giving the $1,000 that people had questioned, how come they're getting 1,000 and they just started a month ago?
Right.
And they're getting 1,000. They've been here for 35 years. It's if you don't ask those questions, no matter how good the idea is, we're going to give everybody $1,000. You still don't know unless you ask a question, what the potential barriers could be. So right. I just had some conversations this morning about some things, and what do we change right away? Do we wait a little bit? I'm still pretty firm on, maybe that timeline's not a 2-year window. Maybe it's a 3-month window, but unless we ask some of those questions, we may make some mistakes that we later regret, and we might be moving too fast in some people's minds. So you bring up a good point. It's some of those things with school, let's change now. I still think making sure you have the conversation and explaining what the process will be is still going to help you out, as opposed to just saying this is how it is.
I agree. And I think having more people involved in that conversation and daring to have the conversation is more important than the output of the conversation, the immediate output of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because again, you're opening the door to really understanding others as they are and where they're coming in, and being able to really marshal the collective strength rather than just responding. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people respond because they feel like they have to have a response, but they're not necessarily taking in consideration all the factors that went into whatever that incident is.
So true. So
Right.
true. Yep. Yep. There's always going to be some hurt feelings with changes.
Right.
And because you don't know, like you just nailed it, like you don't know all the work that went into that. From afar, you might think, oh, that's a dumb decision. Why they do it? But there's people who have helped in making that decision that you need to hear them out first.
Right.
So I'm in agreement with you. Yes.
Absolutely. So I went to the Waterloo website, and I noticed that they don't have any district goals posted, and it says that they're working on them. So what do you think will be some of the most impactful goals going forward?
Oh gosh, yeah, good question. And actually, it's funny that bring that up. I literally just this morning had a transition um, Zoom with the outgoing superintendent, Dr. Lindemann, who's done a really good job there. And we talked about some of her goals that she sees moving forward. And I don't have the sheet up in front of me, but I'm gonna kind of just wing it here.
Spitball it.
They are really pushing, and I think it's great, like this like K through 12 career development at all levels,
Mhm.
every grade level, getting students in that mindset of looking beyond, 12th grade, like setting them up. And a lot of my experience, and you and I have talked about this, we've been at these meetings in Ames before in Des Moines
Right.
about like, how do we get kids like career ready? There's a big push for career readiness here in Iowa. And a lot of that onus falls on high school staff, and it
Right.
falls on the counseling department and administration. How can we distribute that? Like Waterloo Schools has 1,400 employees. Like, how can we help distribute that so it's not falling on like 10 people at the high school level?
Right.
So one of the biggest goals that they have and that we're going to keep working on is a systemic approach to making sure all students are that we prepare them for for life after high school, whatever that might be. Another thing, no joke, there's definitely no way of sugarcoating it. In our district here, in the district up there, the COVID has taken a toll on our when you look at assessment scores, there's even the achievement gap is widening even that much more between our affluent students and our low SES students. We saw it here as well. Like the kids who have support at home made it through COVID just fine. The parents were able to like make it work. The kids whose parents were working or didn't have the resources,
Mhm.
they fell further and further behind. So I'd say a second big goal up there is absolutely like trying to catch up our kids and trying to close that achievement gap, especially.
So I have a question that we didn't necessarily discuss, but I think it's pivotal to what you're talking about. I really feel like mathematics is really essentially part of that plan. So what do you think about the position of when algebra is taught and how it's taught and who teaches it at what
Wow.
point?
You I'm sure you didn't, but I feel like you're reading our school board minutes because
I didn't.
maybe I was like, wow, great question. Because our um our high school math assessment scores are really falling behind.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of that has to do with when we are teaching algebra. Um, right now, and I don't know if I should like say this publicly, but I will. Like I think post COVID this past year, we had like 70 to 80% of our high school students here were taking like the slower algebra course, which is like a 2-year algebra course.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I don't, assessment scores are just one piece of the puzzle. But when our sophomores are taking Iowa assessments or any assessment and they haven't been through algebra yet, and they're being tested on geometry type
Right.
stuff and maybe even algebra 2 stuff, like of course they're not going to know it. No wonder we're falling so far behind. So your question was, when should they be taught algebra? I'm not a curriculum expert, but it seems to me like, and again, I don't know, I hope I'm saying this right, but like, I feel like I'm seeing that our high school our ninth graders should be through algebra. Hopefully by the time they're done with ninth grade is the hope. If not, I know we've got some pockets where we're teaching in the eighth grade, but that's my like not an expert in curriculum answer to you would be that I'm hoping they can get through it by the end of ninth grade. I don't know. What are your thoughts? I'm curious. You might know more about this than I do.
Well, I kind of do. It's ironic because I was an English teacher, so it's not from a personal teaching standpoint. It's as a person who understood very early on in my own academic career that math was that ultimate gatekeeper, and then watching my kids matriculate through the process. So I'll just use myself as an example of my kids. All of my kids took algebra in eighth grade. And that was super important so that they had access to
Yeah.
calculus by their senior year.
Nice. Yeah.
And, I've got one who is doing comp sci right now at the University of Iowa. I have another one who has a master's and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, and he's working on software engineering for a company in San Francisco. And then I have another one who's working on fantasy books that have a lot of, math and science, and it's all about space and fantasy and all of that stuff. So I kind of really do stand behind that, because the lowest test score I had for my kids or their ACT was my oldest son, who struggled the most, and his first score was a 21. And we were able to get him up to a 24. And so that was his ACT scores. And then my youngest two were at, I think, 29, 30, and then my middle one was 34. But I think that was all about exposure and all about making sure that those early foundational math courses like algebra were taken prior to getting to high school, because then he had a lot of room to do other things, as well as matriculate through the whole math sequence prior to graduating high school. And that opened a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities that I don't think he would have had otherwise. So that's my personal opinion based on like the algebra project from, I think, what is that, Philadelphia, where, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he had students in sixth grade. Like at one point in Philadelphia, they were making sure their sixth graders had access to algebra concepts, and then matriculated through the system so that they had a long runway to go and could get those higher math courses before graduate from high school. I think those are incredibly important in our economy and the way that we are needing people with that technical abstract expertise more now than ever.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, you know a lot about that. I'm impressed. I mean, but yeah, when you said algebra, I was like, well, gosh, can we start embedding it even earlier? And you mentioned sixth grade. I agree. If we can start like really starting to get some of those concepts, and then no, I'm sure there's a direct. And then you said the ultimate by the time you're a senior, what courses can we get you into?
Right.
Makes so much sense. And man, your kids are rocking it. As you're explaining all the things they're doing, I'm like, holy cow, nice work.
Well, thank you very much. I take a lot of pride about that.
Yeah.
But again, it's about access and exposure, and those are the things that are so important in your K-12 experience, is to have that access and to have the ability to have those open doors.
Yeah.
So I'd like to switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
And discuss the group project podcast.
Oh,
I know this was something that came out of, like, I remember you said you started it because like you were going to start it, but then COVID hit, and it just provided the perfect opportunity to get started. So since you've done that, where has it taken you, and how have you grown your fellowship in that process?
Yeah, great point. Gosh, we're well past 2 years that I've been doing it for 113 episodes, 114 episodes, which is crazy to think about. how would you, there's anybody who's thinking about doing a podcast, and you and I have talked about this,
Right.
There's so many positives to it. Like so many, it's one of the best things you can do professionally, I feel like, because you're going to learn from other people. You're going to build connections. You're going to, I feel like, and I always say this to people, beyond just the connections, the relationships, the learning, like you become a much better listener. You have to listen. You have to be on your feet to ask questions. So I feel like there's a definite translation to the conversations I have here to my conversations with employees. I'll be the first to admit I'm not the most patient person, and I'm not the best listener, but I feel like I'm really getting better because I can know what to focus on, what people, and really be good about listening. So again, I'm not going to lie, doing 100+ episodes at this point, it's like, oh gosh, it's kind of getting a little tiresome a little bit. But I would say professionally and personally, it's helped me grow so much. And if anybody out there is thinking about either joining Valerie on her podcast, or if they are thinking about doing their own podcast, like, I think you got to take the leap of faith, even if you don't get 1 million followers or listeners, like some of the famous people do. Brene Brown's got all kinds of listeners, and Joe Rogan,
has all kinds of books too.
Yes, that helps out a little bit. It's still, there's so many good things that come from it. I would highly recommend. It's been a great experience.
Awesome. The second part of the question, how did you grow your followership?
Yeah. It's just like anything. I look back on my first 10. I mean, I'm only like in your first dozen episodes here. I look back at my first dozen episodes, and I'm like, whoa, like I was not very good. You're like, what you gave me ahead of the show was like 20 times better than what I ever came up with. But well, I feel like, you just constantly get better and get better and get better. And then you find ways to promote, and then you find ways to reach out to people. It kind of just keeps building. So once I was always nervous to reach out to like bigger names. When I had 10 episodes done, when you have 70 or 80 episodes, it's easy to say like, hey, here's the 80 episodes I've done. Here's some of the people I've talked to. Like, what do you think? It's much easier to sell it. So just like anything, anybody who builds a social media platform, anybody who starts a podcast, anybody, whatever it is, I think you just like start off slow, and then you keep building it. You keep adding episodes, you bring in more people, you start promoting on social media. They promote it with their people. And it just kind of like, it just kind of keeps growing, and more people hear about it. And it kind of pushes, when you see the numbers start to grow, right. It really starts to motivate you, like, oh, okay, this is turning into something. This is really cool. People like what we're putting out there. So I guess I don't have any great tips on hacking the system. I think it's just hard work and continuing to put work out there.
Well, awesome. I think the snowball technique is probably the best organic way to do things, because it is an evolution as you go along. And it allows you to do, as you said, do that growing and learning as you go. So your second book, Turning Points, more lessons lessons learned on leadership, education, and personal.
Very creative.
Hey, when it works, don't fix what's not broken.
Exactly.
So can you tell me a little bit, like, when is it coming out, and kind of where you are in that process?
Yeah. So it's pretty, you're a writer, like the manuscript is written. It's in the hands. I've got 2 rounds of editors that goes through. Okay. And I learned this. It sounds all professional, like I know I'm talking about, but this is what I learned in my first book. Was I have 2 rounds of editors, and then I go to a proofreader. So it's in the hands of like my first editor right now. And she's more the conceptual editor. And she just like, hey, this story makes sense. This story doesn't make sense. Like, she's an educational leader herself. She's in a district level administrative position. She has a really good mind. So she just gives me feedback like, this is great. This sucks. Take this out. Keep doing more of this. And then she gives it back to me. And then I like rework some of the sections. So right now I have like 250 pages written. It's like 55,000 words. It's pretty much that perfect sweet spot for like a nonfiction book. Mm-hmm. But people think, oh, once it's written, then it's done. No, you got to go through rounds of edits. And so I'm looking at, I literally just had a couple emails go back and forth yesterday. I'm looking for September 1st, which is what, like July, August, 3 months from basically to the day of us recording this. So it takes some time. It takes some time to do the editing, the proofreading, the formatting. In terms of what the book is like, I'm super excited. So this is what I say is, my first book for being self-published, for never being an author before, it's done pretty well. It's done pretty good. I continue to get sales every day.
Nice.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting to kind of follow the progress. But when I got done, there was two things I thought. One thing was like, I still have more to like, I didn't get to fit it all into the first book.
Right.
There's still some things I wanted to write. And then two, like, gosh, I could have wrote that a lot better. Like I could have wrote some of those things a lot better. So what you're going to see in book 2 is you're going to see like a very similar structure to book 1, very similar, which is talking about like these short 5 or 6 page sections on 3 topics: leadership, education, personal growth, and just some thoughts I have through my own learning progression, tying in some research, tying in some of the top books in the field, and then like trying to kind of tell like a funny, like in the moment, in the trenches story with all these. And so, yeah, so the second book's going to be about the same. Like the first book was like 300 pages, but very easy to read. The second book will be the same.
First book.
Yeah, there you go. Yes.
Product placement there at its best.
Yes. So I just had somebody yesterday. I mean, but Valerie, you know this, like educators, we love some of the small things, some of the feedback. Like yesterday, I got a text that somebody said, I'm just going to read it real quick. I won't say who it is, but she said, I'm just kind of go off. I started reading your book on my recent flight. It is so good. I'm going to push our team leaders to read it. Thank you again. It's so applicable. It's so applicable to all my leadership roles. It's a great to have it in one place. Thank you so much. So like when you get stuff like that, it's like, man, this is making a difference. Like this is so exciting. And so I get like, I get messages like that a couple times a week, usually, about people who are reading it that just want a fun, easy book to read as an educational leader. That is really like in the trenches. That's my one thing. It's like in the trenches. No disrespect to like other authors out there. There's a lot of authors that are amazing who have totally influenced my thinking, but having a chance to like be a leader through COVID, be a leader through some of the social changes, like to be able to tell like what works and what doesn't has been like fun for me. And I feel like that's like one of the advantages of these books.
Absolutely. That's amazing. That's amazing. You're inspiring me to like really push myself to do the same kind of thing.
You should do it. You should do it. I know you've got it inside you. I know you do.
I do too. Just like, it's like that cliff you get to and you're like, well, I don't know.
Yeah. What I tell everybody is this is, and again, you've got kids, like I got the luxury, I don't know what you want to call it. I don't have kids. So every morning I spend 1 hour writing every single morning without fail. On the weekends, I might do more, but just an hour, put some words on paper, keep working at it. It all starts to tie together and you've got something.
Good advice. So for the kind of like the wrap up, what advice do you have for anyone who is looking to follow you, and kind of what resources would you suggest?
Gosh. Oh, I love that. I love these questions. So first of all, like I would be foolish if I didn't say like, check out my website.
Right.
drjaredsmith.com. I've got like my blogs, the things I focus on most on my website are the blogs and my book summaries. I'm always writing. I feel like there's, and this, again, I'm preaching to the choir right now, but like there's the combination of reading and writing, they work together.
Yes,
Like you read something good, it spurs your ideas. Then you write about it. Then you write about it. Then you go back and read a little bit and you get more ideas. So what you're going to see on my website is you're going to see like a lot of blog posts, like years worth of blog posts. And then you're going to see like hundreds of book reviews, which are like my key takeaways from like the biggest books that are out there in education, leadership, personal growth. I just love reading and that's kind of where I focus in on those three areas. I'm pretty, sometimes I never read fiction, which is really bad. And I see your bookshelf behind you and you're probably a fiction reader.
No.
No. Okay. We're the same then. Okay. Oh my God. I hope I didn't put you down.
So here's true confession. I was working on my dissertation, which was about a family's fiction reading when I realized, oh my God, I don't read fiction.
Wow. That's interesting. I didn't know it was about fiction reading. That's crazy.
Yep. Out of school literacy practices.
Wow. Okay. That makes sense. Makes sense. So no, if you love nonfiction books, I've got like a collection of all my like top notes. So, you talk about resources. And what comes to mind first is like, I always like to try to say, like, I like to give people like the best book. Here's the best book that I would encourage you to check out. And I reread this book for like the third time a couple months ago, and I'm going to tell it to your listeners because I'm so convinced. It's like, in my mind, it just makes so much sense. And it's called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. And he wrote it like, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know. But it talks about like workplace culture and like just the principles that he shares in that book. I'm a huge believer in. I feel like it's evergreen. It's going to be, if you're leading a school now, or if you're leading a school 50 years from now, like the principles he teaches in that book about creating like a safe atmosphere where opinions can be shared. Some of the things that we talked about earlier. Right. It's just so good. And it's funny that like, I didn't even know this, but the district I'm going into, Waterloo, actually is doing that book as a book study, which I didn't even know. It was already my top book. And then I found out they're doing it. And I'm like, this is a sign. Like, this is a sign.
Right.
And then my brother, who's on the business side, he's a CFO out in North Carolina. His company's reading it too. So I'm like, whoa, like worlds collide right now. So I guess a resource I would absolutely encourage you to check out. That'd be like, that's my top. I mean, of all the books I've read, and I full transparency, I love books. We could talk books. I want to hear from you in a second, from your best book in a second. But I also just reread 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'm like, whoa, this is good. Like when he wrote this 20 years ago, or whenever he wrote it, again, ahead of the curve, like foolproof, like COVID proof, anything proof, like that stuff works. So I don't know. I'm curious. I know you and I talked about your favorite book, but can I throw the question back to you?
Absolutely. So it's funny. I rediscovered this book and I feel like turning around and grabbing it is I Won't Learn From You by Herbert Cole. So a lot of what I read is about teaching and learning. Sure. And he had a book with essays in it. So the principal essay is I Won't Learn From You, but there's also some other essays. And I just read Creative Maladaptation or Creative Maladjustment. And that it's so true in terms of how he describes the system of education and how it was created for a certain type of student, and how if you're going to really make sure that it's serving for all of your students, and it's creating citizens, and it's creative, and it's responsive, and it allows kids to be who they are and learn, then you have to develop some degree of creative maladjustment so that you can work and operate in a system that wasn't designed to do what we're asking it to do. And that book was published in 1996. And like you said, I think it was applicable in 1996, and some of his work was from the 70s as well. So like it's still super
Yeah.
applicable,
Yes.
and how we should be looking at the factors of what it takes to teach and learn in a diverse
Yes.
environment
Good
where
stuff.
kids aren't coming in with all the same things.
I just love when I love discovering a book that was written 30, decades ago, but they just like nail it. Like, it's just like,
Right.
whoa, how did they know? Like, how do they know? Like, these are just principles. You asked a question earlier about principles.
Right.
Like, what are the principles that we can learn about that will, like, no matter what era we're in, like, they will be successful. So I love what you were just saying. That's awesome.
Yeah. So and I have lots of books. Like,
I see that.
I'm surrounded by books. This is another one that I'm really vested in, is teachers as cultural workers.
Nice.
Because again, that's one of those, a lot of, like I said, a lot of what I go into is you've chosen leadership as your principal focus, and mine is teaching and learning, which makes
Nice.
sense. My PhD is in teaching and learning. So
Oh, so good.
that is something that I'm still trying to perfect and get better at, and learn how to lead others through that same process.
Love it. Love it.
So do you have any parting words before we kind of wrap up?
Oh gosh. My mind is just thinking, like, thanks for the opportunity. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, it's just fun to connect. We've chatted throughout the years now. I mean, I think back to when I was an assistant principal, or I can't remember, but like, I know you were an assistant principal in Cedar Rapids. I was maybe assistant principal in Waterloo, something like that. When we started connecting, maybe like 8 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you, just kind of keeping the connection going. And you've got a good thing going. I love the questions you ask. So it's fun. Like, I forgot how much fun it is to, like, kind of, sounds bad talking about yourself, right? It's fun to talk about yourself. Who doesn't like sharing those things?
Right.
And I think that's my last parting shot, is like, I just read this last night, that people, and it's from Dale Carnegie's, like, How to Win Friends and Influence People, classic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
About, like, people, you always remember, people are most interested in themselves, right or wrong. That's what, and so as a leader, we should encourage them to share what's on their mind, and not always be about your own personal agenda. So it's just fun. It's fun you to ask these questions, and it's fun for me to kind of share some things that I know. So I appreciate it.
Well, and I appreciate you. And as you can see, you've had some influence on me, and kind of the things that I've decided to get involved with. So I really appreciate having you on my podcast after being on yours 2 years ago. And I really thankful for having this opportunity.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah. And yeah, obviously let's keep in touch. And again, I love those bookshelves back there. I'm gonna see if I can find those at Homemakers, right?
Absolutely. So this has been Dr. Valerie Nyberg with Uncommon Voices, Uncommon Visions, and my guest, Dr. Jared Smith, with the soon-to-be Waterloo School District Superintendent. And I thank you very much for taking the time to listen, and can't wait to hear from you again. Thank you so much.